The sharp click of heels echoed through the sleek, glass-walled conference room as Amara stepped inside. Her dark suit was impeccable, her posture commanding, and her expression unreadable, a mask that had taken years to perfect. The air in the room felt thick with tension, though no one dared say a word. Eyes darted nervously around the table, some avoiding hers altogether, others trying to gauge what she wanted. Amara's gaze swept across the faces before her, lingering for just a fraction of a second on each one. She knew them all too well, their quirks, their habits, their insecurities. But they didn't know her anymore. Not really. They hadn't known her back then either, when she was nothing more than another faceless junior employee desperate for recognition. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice smooth but laced with an edge that made everyone sit up straighter. "I'll make this brief." No one responded. No one dared. Instead, they exchanged uneasy glances, sensing something ominous looming over them like storm clouds gathering before lightning strikes. And yet, none of them could have guessed how personal this moment would become, not until it was far too late. She let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of it, letting it settle into every corner of the room. Then, without warning, she leaned forward slightly, resting both hands on the polished mahogany table. Her knuckles whitened ever so slightly against the wood, betraying the effort it took to keep her composure intact. "You may not remember me," she said finally, her tone deceptively calm. "But I remember you." It wasn't true, not entirely. Of course they remembered her. How could they forget? Back then, she'd been young, eager, full of ideas and ambition. She'd walked into their office 5 years ago with stars in her eyes, ready to prove herself, only to be met with condescension and dismissal at every turn. It wasn't just about being underestimated, it was about being told outright that her worth was fixed, non-negotiable, unworthy of even discussion. "We don't negotiate with junior staff." Those words still rang in her ears, sharp and cutting, delivered by the very people now sitting across from her. At the time, they'd laughed it off, smug in their superiority, confident that she would either accept their terms or leave quietly. What they hadn't counted on was the fire those words ignited within her, a fire that refused to die, no matter how many times they tried to extinguish it. And here she was now, standing where they never thought she'd stand, above them. But Amara wasn't done yet. Oh no, she was just getting started. 5 years earlier, Amara had walked into the same building with trembling hands and a resume clutched tightly against her chest. She dreamed of this moment since college, working for one of the most prestigious firms in the city, surrounded by brilliant minds and endless opportunities. This was her chance to shine, to show the world what she was capable of. Her interview had gone well, or so she thought. She answered every question confidently, asked thoughtful follow-ups, and left feeling hopeful. When the offer came, she nearly cried with relief. Finally, everything she had worked for was falling into place. What she hadn't anticipated was the reality of working there. From day one, it became clear that the company's polished exterior hid a toxic underbelly. Senior employees treated juniors like disposable cogs in a machine, doling out menial tasks while taking credit for any successes. Feedback was non-existent unless it was criticism, and even small achievements were dismissed as mere expectations. For Amara, the breaking point came during her first performance review. She'd poured her heart into her work, staying late nights, volunteering for extra projects, and delivering results beyond what anyone expected from someone so new. Yet when she sat down with HR to discuss her salary adjustment, she was met with cold indifference. "I'm sorry, but we don't negotiate with junior staff," the HR manager had said, barely looking up from her laptop. Her tone was dismissive, almost bored, as if she'd said the same thing 100 times before, and perhaps she had. Amara froze, stunned. "Excuse me." "It's standard policy," the woman continued, finally meeting her gaze with a faint smirk. "Junior employees are paid based on industry standards. There's no room for negotiation." "But," Amara stammered, struggling to find the right words. "I've exceeded my targets consistently. I've taken on responsibilities outside my role. Shouldn't that count for something?" The HR manager sighed, leaning back in her chair as if she were dealing with a particularly slow child. "Look, sweetheart, we appreciate your efforts. Really, we do. But you're still learning. You haven't earned the right to negotiate, yet." That last word hung in the air like a dagger, twisting deeper with every passing second. Yet. As if she were some naive intern who needed to earn her stripes before daring to ask for fair compensation. as if her hard work meant nothing unless sanctioned by their approval. Amara left the meeting fuming, humiliation burning in her cheeks. 4 days afterward, she replayed the conversation in her mind, dissecting every word, every inflection, searching for a way to fight back. But there was none. The system was rigged against her, designed to keep people like her in their place. Or so they thought. In the months that followed, Amara threw herself into her work with renewed determination. If they wouldn't acknowledge her value, she would prove it to them, and to herself. She networked tirelessly, attended workshops, and devoured books on leadership and strategy. Slowly but surely, she began to build a reputation outside the confines of the company. Clients praised her dedication, colleagues admired her resourcefulness, and competitors started taking notice. But inside the office, nothing changed. Her superiors remained oblivious, content to take credit for her successes while offering little guidance or support. Meanwhile, the memory of that fateful meeting with HR lingered like a scar, reminding her daily of the injustice she faced. Then one evening, after another grueling day at the office, Amara received an email that would change everything. It was from a recruiter representing a rival firm, one of the biggest names in the industry. They'd heard about her work and wanted to meet. At first, Amara hesitated. Leaving felt risky, especially given the uncertainty of starting over somewhere new. But deep down, she knew she couldn't stay. Staying meant accepting the status quo, allowing herself to be defined by their limitations. Leaving meant freedom, a chance to rewrite her story on her own terms. She accepted the offer. Over the next few years, Amara climbed the ranks faster than anyone expected. Her relentless drive, coupled with her ability to inspire those around her, earned her promotions and accolades alike. By the time she turned 30, she was leading teams, spearheading major projects, and making headlines in trade publications. People began to take notice, not just of her talent, but of her unshakable resolve. And yet, despite her success, the past never truly left her. Every milestone she achieved felt like a step closer to reclaiming the dignity stolen from her in that conference room. Every victory was tinged with the satisfaction of proving them wrong. Which brought her back to the present, to this very moment. As Amara stood at the head of the table, staring down the same people who had once dismissed her, she felt a strange mix of emotions swirling within her: anger, triumph, sadness, vindication. Part of her wanted to revel in their shock, to watch them squirm under the weight of their own arrogance. But another part, a quieter, more vulnerable part, wanted answers. "Do you remember now?" she asked softly, breaking the heavy silence. Her eyes locked onto the HR manager who had uttered those fateful words, watching as color drained from the woman's face. The room remained deathly quiet, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. No one moved. No one breathed. Amara allowed herself a small, bitter smile. "Good," she said. "Because we're just getting started." With that, she pulled out a folder from her briefcase and placed it on the table. Inside were documents detailing misconduct, favoritism, and unethical practices, evidence she'd painstakingly gathered over the years. Each page was a testament to the culture of exploitation and abuse that had driven her away, and countless others like her. "This company has a problem," she announced, her voice steady and authoritative. "And today, we're going to fix it." One by one, she began naming names, recounting incidents, exposing truths long buried beneath layers of denial and complacency. Some flinched visibly, others tried to interrupt, but Amara silenced them with a single raised hand. By the end of her speech, the atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. Gone was the initial bravado, replaced by palpable fear and shame. These were the same people who had belittled her, mocked her ambitions, and treated her as expendable. Now, they sat powerless, at her mercy. But Amara wasn't finished. "Not yet. There's one last thing," she said, her tone softening ever so slightly. "When I first started here, I believed in this company. I believed in its mission, its potential. But you turned it into something ugly. Something corrupt. And for that, I can't forgive you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. For the first time, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. Crying wasn't part of the plan. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "A termination letter. I'm not negotiating this time," she said, sliding the document toward the HR manager. "Effective immediately." The woman stared at the letter, her hands shaking as she picked it up. Across the table, murmurs erupted, panic spreading like wildfire. But Amara ignored them, focusing instead on the task at hand. Because this wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. About dismantling the system that had failed her and countless others. About creating something better. And she was just getting started. Amara watched as the HR manager, now pale and trembling, read the termination letter. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of papers and the occasional sharp intake of breath. One by one, the others seated around the table began to realize this wasn't just a performance, it was a reckoning. "This can't be happening," someone muttered under their breath, but Amara heard it clearly. She turned her gaze toward the voice, her expression unyielding. "It is happening," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "And if you think this is about me settling scores, you're wrong. This isn't personal, it's principle." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "I'm not here to destroy this company. I'm here to save it, from itself. You've let nepotism, complacency, and arrogance fester for too long. It ends today." Her eyes scanned the room again, meeting each person's gaze with unwavering resolve. Some looked away, unable to hold her stare, while others seemed frozen in place, caught between disbelief and dread. "Starting now," she continued, "we're going to rebuild this organization from the ground up. No more excuses. No more favoritism. Every single employee, junior or senior, will have a voice. Their contributions will be valued, not dismissed. And anyone who cannot adapt to this new culture, well, there's the door." The weight of her declaration settled over the room like a storm cloud breaking open. For years, these people had operated behind closed doors, insulated by power and privilege. Now they were being forced to confront the consequences of their actions, and the reality that their reign was over. When the meeting finally adjourned, the room emptied quickly, leaving Amara alone with her thoughts. She stood at the head of the table, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. The view hadn't changed much since she'd first walked into this building 5 years ago, but everything else had. For so long, she'd carried the sting of rejection and humiliation with her, letting it fuel her ambition. But now, standing where she'd once been told she didn't belong, she felt something unexpected: peace. Not because she'd exacted revenge, but because she'd reclaimed her power, and used it to create change. The door creaked open behind her, pulling her from her reverie. She turned to see an older man stepping inside, his silver hair neatly combed and his suit impeccably tailored. It was Mr. Grayson, the CEO, the same man who had ignored her emails, dismissed her ideas, and allowed the toxic culture to thrive under his watch. "Impressive speech," he said, closing the door softly behind him. His tone was measured, almost neutral, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Amara crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "Thank you. Though I doubt you came here to compliment me." Grayson hesitated, then sighed deeply. "You've made your point, Amara. Loud and clear. But dismantling everything won't solve anything. We need stability." "No," she interrupted sharply. "What you needed was accountability. And you chose to ignore it until it was too late." She stepped closer, her voice softening but no less firm. "This company has potential, Grayson. Real potential. But it'll never reach it unless we tear down the systems that hold people back." He studied her for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Finally, he nodded slowly. "What do you want?" It was the question she'd been waiting for. Amara smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Your resignation. Effective immediately." Grayson blinked, taken aback. "You can't seriously expect." "I do," she said, cutting him off. "Because if you truly cared about this company, you would have stepped aside long ago. Instead, you let it rot. And now, it's time for someone else to take the reins." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out another document, a pre-written resignation letter, complete with Grayson's name typed neatly at the top. She slid it across the table toward him, her movements deliberate and precise. "You have two choices," she said evenly. "Sign it voluntarily, or I'll make sure the board forces you out. Either way, your days here are over." For a moment, Grayson looked as though he might argue. But then, something shifted in his expression, a flicker of resignation, perhaps even relief. He picked up the pen on the table, signed the document without another word, and slid it back to her. "Take care of it," he said quietly, his voice heavy with finality. Then, without another glance, he turned and walked out of the room. In the weeks that followed, Amara set about implementing sweeping changes throughout the company. Performance reviews became transparent, salaries were adjusted to reflect merit rather than tenure, and mentorship programs were established to support junior staff. Employees who had once felt invisible suddenly found themselves valued and empowered. Not everyone stayed, of course. Some resisted the changes, clinging to the old ways until they were asked to leave. Others left voluntarily, unwilling to adapt to the new culture. But those who remained embraced the transformation, working together to build something stronger, fairer, and more inclusive. As for Amara, she took on the role of interim CEO, determined to lead by example. Her journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge had shaped her into the leader she was meant to become. And while she knew there would still be obstacles ahead, she faced them with confidence, not because she believed she was invincible, but because she knew she wasn't alone. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Amara found herself back in the same conference room where it had all begun. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the polished table and sleek glass walls. She sat down at the head of the table, leaning back in her chair as she gazed out at the city below. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Turning, she saw Mia, one of the junior employees she'd hired during her tenure, standing nervously in the doorway. "Everything okay?" Amara asked, gesturing for her to come in. Mia hesitated, then nodded. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. Before you, I never thought I could make it here. But now," she smiled shyly. "Now I feel like I actually belong." Amara returned the smile, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "That's exactly how it should be," she said gently. "Never forget, you earned this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As Mia left the room, Amara leaned back again, closing her eyes for a brief moment. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. She had fought for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. And in doing so, she had proven that sometimes the best way to move forward is to turn back and rewrite the story you started with.